This is the Canyon City Energy Franchise Committee meeting of April 10th, 2023. I am here. Carol Dunn is here, Doug Cohen is here, Kirk Souther's here, Emily Tracy's here, Kathy Worthington is here, and Steve Andrews. And Ryan Stevens. Anyone online, and Joe Ferreira.
We are the only participants.
Okay.
Are you a Portuguese guy?
My family is from Cuba, but that is a very common, Pereira is a common Portuguese name and common Spanish name.
From California, lots of Ferraras and
Yeah.
Portuguese.
So did I tell you, Doug, that I have Portuguese in my ancestry?
You do?
I do.
Do you eat linguiça?
But I'm afraid it goes so far back that we're no longer claimed as members of the Portuguese clan. So no. I don't think we have any citizens request to speak, and I don't think we're gonna address our recommendation document under new business. But Joe, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself, and we're here to hear your
Should
presentation.
we go around just a minute?
Oh, sure, that would be great. Oh, I was trying to see that.
Okay, well, we've met by Zoom, so Emily Tracy, member of the committee and member of city council, and longtime advocate for lower cost electricity in this area.
I'm Carol Dunn. I'm a retired business owner. We owned a grocery store here in town for 45 years and made linguiça. It's really good. And, you know, I've been working with Emily for a few years on a committee to see if we can get lower rates for our city and more justice for the residents of Canyon City.
Doug Cohen, committee member, local resident.
And also active in a lot of Canyon City goings on, and especially water boards that he's a board member on one of our irrigation ditch companies here. And I'm John Hamrick. I'm chair of the committee. I'm also represent District 3 for city council, and I'm mayor pro tem. I'm retired, but my background is I have a degree in extractive metallurgical engineering, and so my career has been mainly involved with mining and mines, and that's what brought me to Canyon City. And Kirk.
I'm Kirk Souther, retired. We just moved out about 2.5 years ago from Kansas City. I worked for the city and also with a nonprofit. A lot of cleanup, environmental and beautification projects, and I do, and I'm a member of the committee, of course. I have a lot of interest in helping the lower income people. You know, programming that we can design to help them out.
Kathy Worthington, retired and also serving on council for District 2, but originally was appointed to this committee to try and give utility perspective and also educate on the difference between rates and franchise and things that way. And my last position was area manager out of Pueblo for Southern Colorado. So dealt a lot with Black Hills, and we were always looked at as the good guys at that time. So now I'm not so sure where they just said, but that's
Ebbs and flows.
yeah, exactly.
Joe and I know each other. I am not a member of the committee, just public citizen.
Kind of unofficial.
Yeah. That's official.
Yeah, Ryan Stevens, I'm the city administrator.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think. I'm Joe Pereira. I'm the deputy director of the Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate, formerly known as the OCC, the Office of Consumer Counsel. A couple of years ago, we had a name change, and I'll hit on that when we get through the slides and whatnot. I appreciate the invitation to come down and meet with everyone today. it's nice. It's nice to get in a room with folks and, you know, we do a lot of our business now with little squares around our head. And so I very much appreciate the opportunity to come down and chat. I think the invitation and the outreach from Emily came from is we've been having a conversation up in Denver and at the Public Utilities Commission where we work a lot of the time around affordability, and affordability is a big broad term, but this has really become a hot topic, and it takes a while to get up to Denver around that issue. I of course know, you know, that Kansas City and lots of southern Colorado within the investor-owned utility district has been having this conversation for a while. That's actually how I know Steve. I mentioned I used to work at the energy office, and we've probably known each other 8 or 9 years now. And it really started as, I guess, you know, a liaison for the governor to meet with folks in Pueblo and to talk about the issues that were going on there. And so we've been having this conversation now in Denver for the last couple months, largely due to a very steep increase in the bills for Xcel Energy. And with policy, Xcel often, you know, drives the conversation and is kind of most of the air in the room. And so that's really what's raised folks' attention. So that's of course something that we've been talking about for a long time. We've been talking with the media and anyone that we can to say, hey, there's this looming problem with natural gas prices and a lot of other issues that have come up, and time to start paying attention. And then in November and December this year, you know, we saw massive outreach from customers all over the state. So in Xcel's territory, Black Hills territory, the municipal utilities, and of anywhere where folks use energy, you know, we heard from them. We heard November, December, January, we at our office had outreach of probably about 600 or more customers throughout the state. And so, you know, we talked about, you know, public meetings often don't have, you know, ton of attendance, and that's our experience with the PUC too. And so to get 600 outreach calls and emails and, you know, whatever form of correspondence you can get really, really brings the level of attention or notice to customers that we haven't seen. And so as a result of that, a few months ago, Governor Polis issued a letter to all state agencies and utilities that said, hey, we have an affordability crisis, and there are a whole laundry list of things that, you know, different state agencies can do. This is the Public Utilities Commission and Colorado Energy Office. Here are some things that utilities can do. Here's how folks can work together. And then about a month and a half ago, Senate President Fenberg announced that he was going to be holding or convening, it's called the Joint Special Committee on Rising Utility Rates.
Joint Select.
Joint Select Committee. Joint Select Committee. These committees are not common, you know, so we don't see these very often. It's the legislature brings the committee together. It has to meet within the session, has to convene and end its work within the session. So this is, you know, kind of a rare occurrence. And so for, you know, 3 weeks in a row, the committee held, you know, half a day hearing where they heard from our office, the Public Utilities Commission, the Energy Office, each of the electric and gas utilities in the state, investor-owned utilities in the state had an opportunity to meet with the select committee Colorado Springs Municipal Utility and a couple of the co-ops also got to meet and talk. And then they also heard from environmental groups, large consumer groups. And I believe, Emily, that's where we kind of connected off of that presentation. And so I'm going to walk through a bit of the presentation that I gave to the Joint Select Committee, but I'll say some of this is, you know, kind of deep insider baseball. So if it's too boring, or if you want to take like a very different turn, let's do that. Like, don't feel like confined to these slides, or, you know, I think better to have a conversation than me walk through a bunch of slides. and stuff
Yeah,
like
I think
that.
you can assume everyone here around the table is an energy nerd.
Okay,
To some
All right, well, that-
degree or level.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I don't know if you've had a chance to meet John Behill from Black
Yep.
Hills Energy, but John, we did introduce ourselves. Do you need to introduce yourself for Steve?
Yeah, I'm just a visitor, John B. Hill, Community Affairs for Black Hills Energy, and I've been a committee chair.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. And so, John, you'll be glad I don't have Black Hills specific data here, but I think I'm prepared to talk, you know, the whole variety of topics. I have some stuff on what we've been doing with Atmos, which I think is relevant too. And so, you know, we can kind of go any direction that folks want to go, but you know, so I thought what I'd do is maybe start by introducing everyone to our office. And so I mentioned that we had a name change. But, you know, the Office of Consumer Advocate, UCA or OCC, has been around since the 80s. And, you know, we're a small little office within the Department of Regulatory Agencies. Right now, we have 7 folks in our office, and then we have 5 lawyers and a paralegal that represent us through the Attorney General's office. And our main role is to intervene on behalf of residential, small business, and agricultural customers as a client group before the Public Utilities Commission. And so, you know, imagine that just, I've seen folks call it like a public defender in front of the Public Utilities Commission. The PUC is, I think folks know, is a quasi-legislative body. It gets its direction from law on how it's supposed to treat public utilities. And it also acts as a quasi judicial body. So there are 3 commissioners that act as loose judges in all of these litigated cases that the investor-owned utilities bring before them. And that ranges the gamut from just very small decision-making to real big things that affect rates and that affect, you know, resource plans and the mix of our energy and where we get our energy from. And
Joe, on this slide, do you happen to know the date of the promulgation of the cited Colorado revised statutes?
oh, I don't.
I'm not asking
It's
for the-
1981-ish.
81-ish?
Yeah, and where consumer advocates really come from, and there are offices like ours in most states across the country and in DC, is as a result of the energy crisis.
We had decarbonization goals in 1981.
No, I'm gonna talk about that in
Okay.
just a minute. We're getting to that. So, I mean, you know, the energy crisis in the 70s really brought to bear, you know, the volatility of electric and gas prices.
Gas
And-
attachment scheduling.
What also was happening in the 70s is there was lots of nuclear power development. And nuclear power hasn't had a strong history of cost containment.
Successful.
And they have generally run over budget, you know, by billion. But when we're talking about nuclear power, right, we're talking about billions, and we're not, you know. And so the scale of that really had an impact. And so a movement across the country started bringing the consumer advocate to the table at public utilities commissions because of these cost overruns, and our legislators really feeling like, hey, consumers need to have a voice, and realizing that the Public Utilities Commission is often pretty inaccessible, right? And so for many years, the the mission of the consumer advocate was really cost, right? Purely cost. And so when we look at our originating statutes, it's really, you know, short-term and long-term costs. And I'd even put emphasis on short-term. And so that was really a guiding principle on how consumer advocates would operate at the PUC.
How do you, or how long do you consider short term?
You're gonna see a lot of this is pretty
Okay.
amorphous, you know, short term. I think for many, many years, and I listened through stories and a bit of experience now. You know, the short term meant the case in front of me,
Okay,
right? How do I advocate for the least cost outcome here? And I think for many, many years, that's how consumer advocates operated. You know, now within the last decade, lots of other issues have become important to legislatures across the country, have become important to communities and customers in a different way than just cost. And so here in Colorado, government agencies have, you know, sunset provisions, right? That we have to go before the legislature every X amount of years and justify our existence. And the legislature looks and says, you know, what's important for this agency, and gives us direction through new statutes. So a few years ago, we were reauthorized, and the legislature added to our mission these beyond cost things like statutory decarbonization goals, just transition, which is advocating for communities that are moving away from coal or fossil fuel industries within their communities, and how, you know, those communities can be transitioned. Environmental justice, which is, you know, looking at disproportionately impacted communities of the past and how energy policy affects them, and then also how new energy policy is going to have impact on these communities, and also long and short-term costs. And so now our office is in this balancing act about, you know, how do we at any given time balance and promote all of these new, you know, statutory direction. I think one, sometimes it's harder than others. I mean, I think we see a lot right now, we see a lot of the environmental benefits and the cost benefits are aligning. And so sometimes that makes decision-making a little easier. Other times, you know, it's a tougher internal conversation, and we don't always get it right, but we're always trying to, you know, learn and build off of that. So one of the biggest pieces, if we go back to that slide one more second, I'm going to hit on this, is our first mandate in statute is to represent the public interest. So that's above a residential customer, that's above an agricultural customer. But as you're going to see here, what does the public interest mean, right? That's something we wrestle with. I think that's what all policy makers are, you know, trying to land on, but it has a specific meaning for what we do in public utilities. So let's go to what the UCA does. So we are an intervener by right at the Public Utilities Commission. That means that if there's a proceeding there, all we have to say is we want to participate, and we're included in the PUC process. There are two other interveners, the by right, which is Public Utilities Commission trial staff, and then the Colorado Energy Office, who represents the governor at these proceedings. Everyone else has to petition for intervention. I think as folks might be aware here, and then receive permission to participate in the case. And we participate in everything there. We have our weekly case review on Thursday, and last week we had 45 active cases. And you know, some of these take years and years to litigate. you know, the big prominent things that we work on, rate cases, that's the bread and butter of our office. That's when, you know, our friends at Black Hills or Public Service come in and say, hey, we have a change in rates that we'd like to make. Can we, you know, argue back and forth on what is just and reasonable, which is a term, another amorphous term in public utilities law that we try to land on. I'll mention, you know, relevant to this group, we are in the final stages of an Atmos rate case. So after being out for a few years, Atmos came in, asked the Public Utilities Commission for, I believe, I'm gonna say in the neighborhood of $4 to $7 million in new rates. We went before a judge and argued all the smaller, you know, intricacies of that, and the judge recently issued a decision which we were very happy about. It moves Atmos's rates in the other direction, which doesn't happen very much. We found out that the judge anticipates that there's somewhere between a $500,000 and $1.5 million revenue surplus with Atmos. And so I think we're going to be looking at a rate reduction with Atmos. This is not very common at the Public Utilities Commission. Usually when we see utilities come in, we're arguing about the degree to which rates will go up, not necessarily whether rates are going to go up. We, in our outreach with a lot of customers, you know, we see, customers routinely say now, you know, why don't they just say no to rates? Or why don't they just say no to rate increases? And that's a complicated answer, but the gist is the relationship between the utility and the regulator is the utility has costs for operations, and like everything we do, costs go up. And so that's often why you see, you know, rates continue to move up year after year. So Atmos has kind of one more step. There's a thing called exceptions, where you go from a judge up to the Public Utilities Commission, and the commission will give final decision on that judge's decision. And we expect probably a decision from the commission on Atmos's rates around April 15th or so, or a hearing on Atmos's rates around April 15th. We also do resource planning. So these are the long-term plans about, you know, what's the energy mix of the utility going to be. The state has decarbonization goals, and so we have to determine how the utilities are going to meet their decarbonization goals. 2030, 2040, 2050 as benchmark. And, you know, lots of engineering type things, transmission and distribution planning, all the nuts and bolts of where wires are going to go and where pipes are
I
going to
ask
go.
a question
Yeah, of
about
course,
that.
of course.
I recently attended a distribution planning stakeholders meeting in Pueblo for Black Hills. And I just wondered, from your perspective, is there anything that the state agencies are looking for in that process?
Yeah, so we are, I think the PUC, and I'll say this, it's important to know that the UCA isn't a regulator at all. Right, we're an opinion at the Public Utilities Commission, almost like everyone else. We're there more, and we maybe have a little more familiar with it, but there's nothing that says the Public Utilities Commission has to listen to us. So we're looking at, in distribution planning, we're looking at, you know, do the companies have, you know, the infrastructure to deliver power to everyone, reliable power to everyone that needs it? And does the system look like it's built to meet our state's decarbonization goals? But not any more than that. You know, this is that cost issue. You know, you'll hear in you'll hear the term gold plating a lot when you look at infrastructure. And so we want to avoid gold plating, right?
So maybe I missed it, maybe we didn't talk about it, or you didn't talk about it. How are you funded?
Great question. So our office is funded through customer rates. You won't even see it on your bill, but a very, very small fraction of each kilowatt hour goes to fund our office. Our budget is right around $2 million a year. And that funds, you know, all of our activities with our lawyers, paper clips, and all of that. I think, you know, one of the interesting, to like put it on scale in our hearings, one of the conversations we've been talking about with the legislators is in one public service rate case, their outside counsel and expert witness budget was 2.7 million. So we have, you know, a pretty big disparity in kind of the resources. And we typically bring one or two witnesses and have a couple lawyers working on a case. In many cases, public service will have 23 witnesses, you know, 7 to 10 outside lawyers. That doesn't include all of their internal kind of resources and whatnot.
And guess who pays for that?
Yeah, right.
Ratepayers.
Exactly.
One of the things that's worth mentioning, Joe may not choose no owner on this, but I used to be a board member up there with this organization, and as part of their justification of their existence, they have to demonstrate savings to customers from their efforts. And that has been a positive over time. Actually, a significant positive over time. I don't know if you have any recent numbers on that.
I think
It's kind of hard, it's probably hard to say, well, just the UCA accomplished that, but in a few cases, it actually is true.
we try, there's 2 points I hit on there is, one is we also have an oversight board, so a policy advisory board. These are governor and legislative appointed citizens that, you know, we meet with every month and we talk about what we're working on, and they provide policy guidance to us and, you know, help us understand the perspectives of small business owners and agricultural customers and, you know, enviros and, you know, whoever kind of sits on that board.
Terry Hart is the local.
That's right.
Is the local guy.
Does Colorado Farm Bureau appear before you folks?
Right now, we have a board member from the Farm Bureau, and
Who is that, please?
what's that?
Who is that?
Sean Shelton, I believe is his name.
Sean Shelton or Sean Martin?
Sean Martini. There we go. I'm mixing up 2 board members
Thank
there.
you.
Yeah. And so to this, so we have to report out every year as part of our government process. You know, are some metrics on how effective you are and whatnot. And so we kind of keep a rolling average, but on an annual basis, our general return to customers has on the low end been about 63 to 1. So, you know, $120 million or so at a minimum per year, all the way to on the high end, 100 or 150 to 1, depending on what kind of cases and whatnot come before the PUC. So, we also are allowed to appear before federal agencies, and so we do some work before the FERC, which is essentially the PUC on a federal level. We interact with FTC. Right now, we've been doing FTC's thinking about investigation on public utilities more broadly, and so we've been meeting with them and talking about issues. And then the FCC as well. So we have a small part of our office is devoted to telecom. Telecom was largely deregulated within the last, 2 decades. And so that mostly we work on issues around 911, some issues around prison communications and whatnot, but it's a very small part of the work we do. The work that's happening at FERC is a lot around rulemaking on transmission. Transmission is a hot topic in this country, and so they're working to revamp that. And then Western market adoption is a real big topic. Our utilities, Black Hills Public Service, have announced that they're looking, or they're going to look for permission to join the SPP Markets Plus construct, which is a way for utilities to buy and share electricity on a bigger scale and provide some resiliency benefits and whatnot. And so, so we have our hands in a lot, but really, like I mentioned, the bread and butter is the day-to-day work of the Utilities Commission. So it's bit of the,
So based on that presentation, I probably should have said, I'm also a member of the E911 board here in Fremont County, and we have a combined regional communication center, the 911 center. And that covers this county and Custer County. I'm a member of that board also.
interesting. This, I mean, this isn't a very interesting topic is, you know, individual 911 nodes versus kind of regional 911 nodes and how, you know, economies of scale versus independence of, you know, local government and who controls, I don't know, control maybe isn't the right word, but who kind of frames what happens, you know, locally, and you know, there are always fees attached to that. And so, you know, how are communities, you know, impacted by the costs of running 911 and, you know, that being an essential service, and how do we deal with that? So it's an interesting topic. I'm not an expert at it at all, but we have, you know, lots of really good intellectual like memory there. Most of the folks, and maybe this won't surprise folks, but most of the long-term folks in utility regulation started in telecom and then learned the energy business, you know, as a secondary thing, because telecom is the bells and all of that stuff.
So if I can pass on perhaps
Of course.
some wisdom from my 911 board experience and communication center is there are no economies of scale.
No economies of scale.
There are none. No economies of scale. It pretty much doesn't matter. I mean, you know, there were 3 different agencies and several fire agencies that came together to create this board, and really with the way costs are going, there are no, you know,
Yeah.
if you were still doing it, you're as individuals, it would be higher, but with the rate increase, I mean, with all the price increases and technology and more expensive technology and things like that, there really doesn't appear to be an economy of
Well,
scale.
we're gonna talk about some of that a little bit too, because it happens in the electric and gas industry too, that we're not. You know, some of the efficiencies are being harder to realize because of some of the challenges here.
Are you finding, what I consider utilities are pretty dang complicated when you get down to it? So like the select committee from the legislature. Are they understanding what all is, I mean, I'm sorry to put it that way, but you know, it's a learning process to, and heck, even I still learn stuff and because I've forgotten it. But it's one of these things. Are they getting it to where they're actually accomplishing stuff, or are they going off on wild goose chases without knowing what they're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, I think that they are doing their best to get educated on the subjects. I think that they, you know, I don't want to speak for them. I don't represent them at all, but I think that they have taken, you know, kind of really broad look at what are all the things. Let's go to the next, and I can transition this a little bit.
And I just add a quick comment that, Joe, it just, you know, I think mostly what the committee, the legislative committee has done is listen to presentations, and they've been wonderful presentations. And it's it's kind of an unknown, I think, what they do next, if anything, or do they, you know, create an interim committee, or, you know, I just don't know what's gonna happen next on that, but it's a legitimate question. But on the other hand, some of what we've talked about for a long time may need legislative solutions ultimately. So, and I was a member of the 2019 interim committee on investor-owned utilities, and again, great hearings, great presentations, but there wasn't really much of anything that came out of that committee that headed by Leroy Garcia.
Yeah. It's hard to know what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have any unique insight there. I will say though that, you know, I mentioned we got 600 calls. I mean, the legislators have all gotten calls as well. And so, you know, I think that's, you know, a point about, you know, citizen action and citizen input, like does have influence here. And so to the extent that, people are involved, I think that gives the legislators, thoughts, at least.
Did I understand you right? Your budget is 2.1 million?
Right around 2.1 million.
Well, I want to compliment you then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
5 attorneys, 7 members, and you got a $2 million budget. I got a compliment.
I appreciate
you're
it.
not paid nearly enough.
Comparison, I was part of, when I worked for the State Department of Human Services in 91, the legislature approved the creation of a whole new division of the Department of Human Services. And its budget was around 2 million in 1991, so you can make up whatever you want out of that.
Yeah, we added some staff in that sunset. We hadn't had new staff or budget in 15 years. And so, I mean, I think that, works both ways. One is you could use more resources, but also I think it's important to show value in the work you do, in a government agency. And so we try to do our best to be respective of that too. So this is a couple graphs that I shared with the joint committee. This is public service. And we'll work on one for Black Hills next time, but it wouldn't look quite like this. But one thing that I think is important to understand about what's going on right now is kind of a threefold convergence of factors. So we have seen the commodity price of natural gas just go through the roof. In Winter Storm Uri, we saw natural gas, at $140, $200 on the spot market. And so we saw, big pass-throughs there. But even recently, when gas has been at $2 and it's $2 this week, we were seeing, purchases at $7 and $9. And so that's a massive increase just on the commodity price of gas. And we've seen colder weather this year. And so that means, at least up in the Denver metro area, especially, that means folks using more gas. And then with public service, but generally with all of our utilities, we've also seen growth in utility base rates. And so these are the operations and the things that they buy. I can say, one thing we know about a contrast relative to Xcel and Black Hills is Black Hills has done a better job at purchasing and thinking about how it procures natural gas than public service has. And so customers of Black Hills have not seen as precipitous rise in the commodity cost of gas compared to what we've seen in public service. Now, why that is, I don't know. Talking with Nick Wagner, I mean, Nick has been complimentary of their gas purchasing desk. I wish it were, and that really could be. I wish it were more systemic, or there was a better way to say it's not just some folks sitting at a desk that do a better job of purchasing than others. But sometimes in the utility world, that's what it comes down to. And so, yeah, and so we've seen that. But these graphs are really, why we see what we see and why this conversation's happening right now.
Can you give just a little bit of an idea of the colors?
Oh, sure. That's good point. So yellow and brown, so yellow on the left and brown on the right are our commodity prices. That's what natural gas. Orange and blue are what we call base rates. So orange is your volumetric rate. That's the 20 cents or 12 cents per kilowatt hour you see, or X amount per decatherm. And then the blue on the bottom is the fixed charge. And so one thing we fight over at the public utility is how much is going to be in volumetric rates and how much is going to be on that fixed charge. And we tend to think that fixed charges are kind of regressive, and so we generally push toward things being included in rates more. utilities like fixed charges because they're known, right? And so they know every month how much, you know, with specificity, how much they're gonna bring in. Does that help? All the other ones are all the little riders and stuff that come on your bill. Excel has, I think right now, 8 or 9 riders on their bill.
I have a copy of my bill if anyone needs to.
So, I know I'm getting real long-winded here, so I'm gonna try to go fast on some of this, but. You know, all of this really what's happening here really stems from the development of, you know, monopoly utilities. And so there was, you know, back in the past, this idea of a natural monopoly, which is, hey, we shouldn't have lots of different power lines or lots of different gas pipes all overlapping each other with different companies providing different service. And so, you know, that's kind of the natural monopoly efficiency concept. But there's also a risk aversion deal with monopolies too. Is like, how do you get investors to put, you know, their money in an investment basket where it's a lot easier for an investor when you don't have competition, right? I can generally like understand around what my return is going to be. And so, so natural monopoly just didn't come out of a technical fix. It came out of an financial fix as well. You know, what you saw was when electric utilities really started, they started to mimic railroads. And I think we've all heard of, you know, the school lessons about the robber barons and, you know, railroads building these big, you know, manipulative monopolies and whatnot. And so the electric utilities in the past started seeing those same traits. And so that's why we have public utilities commissions. That's why we have regulation. Let's go to the next one.
And on that one, wasn't a part of the bargain of, you know, establishing essentially government blessed monopolies was that there were many areas that weren't going to have electricity unless there was some requirement from the government to provide it. And wasn't that kind of the trade-off? You get a monopoly, but you also have to serve everybody.
Yeah, and that's especially in urban areas. So with the co-ops, we know, you know, co-ops and the rural electrification was kind of part of the New Deal process. And that was really like, we know we need electricity, you know, everywhere in our country to, you know, build a strong country and build rural economies and all of that. So the co-op model looks a little different, but in urban areas, there really was, you know, hey, this grand bargain. And you'll hear our utility friends even today talk about their duty to serve or their requirement to serve. And that's really what that is if a customer, and if a customer wants to be hooked up, we have to hook them up.
Yeah.
I spent 3.5 years in Lubbock, Texas, and one of the reasons was the getting ready to
Deregulate.
deregulate. And you went down the alleys and you had Lubbock Power and Light and you had SPS poles, and all it took, whatever the lightning hit the night before, you had customers switching.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting, and talk about, you know, looking at a duplication of infrastructure and so forth. It was pretty interesting to see how that transpired.
Yeah, and we have a lot of the country that sits in deregulated electric markets. I used to live in Delaware, and we were there when Delmarva deregulated. And so one day we had, you know, I think at that time electricity was like 13 cents per kilowatt hour, and then the next day it was like 29 cents per kilowatt. And customers in a lot of areas still have retail choice. And so one of the tensions I'm sure that you all have explored, right, is the difference between the efficiencies you get from monopoly utility, or, you know, the potential for cost savings related to competition. And so that's something I think that folks are, you know, wrestling with in the state a little bit. And several communities, including Canyon City, right, have had concerns about, you know, what is the value that we're getting from our utility how can, the utilities operations or costs align a lot more with our goals as a city? And Boulder's had the same conversation, Bubba's had the same conversation. There are a lot of other cities too, and so,
I'll just add quickly to that. I've said this to Black Hills folks too, so it's not anything different, but Black Hills really in a way has a special challenge because their service territory is a high poverty area. And so, and they know this, they've got this highest electricity cost in the state in a part of the state that really struggles. And so there's no answer in what I just said. It's just, I think we all have to recognize that that's part of the issue is that we have so many folks here that struggle with just basic needs.
I mean, this is, I would say like every community has a different challenge, right? And I don't think the utilities would disagree with this. Especially in the transition that we're having, every community has a different wish or a different challenge. So, Boulder has an issue with their utility and about their decarbonization goals and what they want their community to look like. Pueblo had its issues. Colorado Springs has its issues with, with Drake right in the middle of town, right? And so every community is wrestling with what does our energy transition look like? And some of that has to do with this regulatory compact, especially with IOUs. And so you'll hear a lot about the compact, and it's what you'll hear is that the utility has an obligation to serve, and in return for its obligation to serve, it's able to receive a reasonable rate of return for its efforts. This is a concept or a compact, but it's, I put here specifically, it's a rhetorical concept. So this compact doesn't originate in law, right? There's no like formula, there's no law in federal law or in state law that says this is the arrangement. This is a rhetorical conversation about parties and the regulators on how they think they should be regulated. So I mentioned that there's no legal agreement, this concept has never been affirmed in law, but this is the presiding narrative. And what we say in our office is that utility regulation is based in the state constitution and the state's laws. And that's the exchange. And so, so the utility, if it's told by state law to decarbonize, it has to decarbonize, and it has to provide service underneath that umbrella. If it's told that it has to have certain cost components or do certain analysis, it has to do that. And that's the basis for its obligation of service. And so we say the regulatory compact is not just about, hey, you provide power and we pay you for it. It's about you provide power that reflects state law and that reflects the Constitution, and that the compact changes all the time. Right? When we first started, it was about just providing electrons over wires. Now we have, even in ours, we have environmental justice, and we have just transition, and we have decarbonization, and we have cost pressures. And so it's really the utility's job to meet these goals. So if the state says you have to provide affordable power, it's the obligation of the utility to provide affordable power. And, we have to do a good job from our office in advocating for that. And the regulators have to meet that challenge as well. But, the obligation to serve or the return is really based on, what do the citizens of that territory need and want? And that's a shifting thing. What we get concerned about is this: if we just break this relationship down to we provided electrons and you pay us a return, it puts that exchange in the center of the conversation. So how did the utility do to serve and how much does it get paid becomes the center of the argument. And that's different than what I just said, right? The community wants decarbonization or community wants low rates. And so we lose our focus about that relationship when all we do is reduce it to a compact that says, we provided you this, you pay us that. And it's our argument that a lot of what is happening right now related to affordability or tensions within communities and whatnot is that this is what's happened. Is we're missing on the serve part, and all we're doing is thinking about economic exchange in a traditional sense. So
And so really, that's pretty interesting, because what that really says, to me anyway, is that although this is way too dark and, comparison, but it's a little bit like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic by dealing specifically, groups like this dealing only with PUC. What you just said is really where the rubber meets the road is state law and state constitution. PUC just executes that. And really, if we want to look at a potential different paradigm, PUC is not really the place to start, is what I would take away from that.
I think I would say both. I think I would say that, like, local communities have an opportunity to influence both. They have, law is obviously the end and final, right? We know what we need to do with that. But the Public Utilities Commission has a lot of leeway within the law to think about these same kind of questions. And so, I wouldn't underwrite or undercut the role that, communities and citizens have in providing feedback to the Public Utilities Commission. And I would say this commission in particular, that has really risen to the forefront, that I, even in the last couple years, have seen the public opinion, community's opinions matter a lot more at the Public Utilities Commission than they have, in the other 8 years that I've been observing the body. And so, I think each has its own role. I think, to the extent that customers and communities make it very clear to the Public Utilities Commission on what you want, that helps them do their job. This group, I think, has much more sophistication, but at public hearings, what the PUC often hears from a customer is, pardon my language here, but my utility sucks. Like that, but that's not like an actionable, that's not like an actionable statement, other than it helps the commission understand like what's happening with my customers, but it doesn't go much farther. Yes, sir.
So, Joe, you said that whatever the PUC says, the utility, whatever utility that be, needs to accomplish that goal. So, if it really isn't accomplishable, by that I mean, okay, natural gas is not controlled, right? So the government tells utilities, get rid of your coal-fired plant. So you build a natural gas plant. And you can't control what makes that plant run. What's utility to do? By that, I mean, to satisfy the law, there's a possibility they may have to go broke. Because sources of which they cannot control are there. What happens?
Yeah, I think this is an important tension, right? And this is part of the tension within utility regulation right now. One thing I'll say is I think the folks involved understand like the volatility of natural gas and you know, what I'm talking about here is actually a little more on the utility operations side, and there's opportunities, I think there. One of the things, you know, if I can be more succinct and we get to the slides at the end is, you know, we're in a situation right now where, and this isn't just with utilities either, within our economy, we have, inflation outpacing wages at, you know, an increasing rate, but we also see kind of corporate profits at a level that we haven't seen, you know, in a long time either. I think I saw an article on eggs a couple weeks ago, right? And like the 4 egg producers in conglomerates in the country had like 700-fold increase in profits in 1 quarter. Like, bird flu is something,
Yeah.
but eggs, you know.
Excuses are another.
And so, and we have, you know, we have attention within, you know, regulation to make sure we have a healthy utility. I think even as the public advocate who is at odds with the utility all the time, it's important that the utility is healthy in order to provide reliable service and to meet important goals state sets out. But it's also a monopoly that provides essential service to capture customers. And so we also probably need to push back. We need to push back a little bit on the outcomes that the utilities are seeing. And this is the public interest.
Joe, can I
Piece of
just
this, yeah.
bring up something before we go on? You're talking about the regulatory compact. One thing that we've discovered as we've gone through this is that the business model that IOUs use seems to be very old. You have holding companies like Black Hills Corporation in Rapid City, and they have 8 operating companies. So what we found is that they loan money to another one of their operating companies, pay back interest, they make money on that. There's a real problem, I think, with that whole business model because you have no idea how much money they're making. So how does that business model be adjusted so that you can at least understand all the money that's being made from transactions from one company to the other that they own?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge. I mean, right now, we're about to start hearings on a rate case with about Rocky Mountain Natural Gas, which is a transportation company that sits above Black Hills Gas. And its customer is Black Hills Gas. You know, and for the most part. And so, you know, the benefits that, you know, the ROEs that Rocky Mountain Natural Gas has, you know, are not in line with the ROEs that Black Hills Gas gets. And so essentially, this is the same company that does a little bit different thing. You know, how do we deal with that? And so we make arguments that they should probably be pretty aligned on their capital structures and how they move debt through and ROEs, because they're kind of the same. Black Hills, I think, would make a different argument than that, and other parties would make different arguments as well. And that's what we kind of try to hash out at the PUC, and hopefully the regulator kind of sees that. I mean, we have other utilities in the state that have a similar arrangement. We have one utility that's owned by a parent company, then that parent company is 100% equity investors. So it's a public utility, but not a public company. And so we don't have the same levels of transparency that you even get with Black Hills or Public Service, because they're publicly traded and there are rules and laws about how they operate. And this company, its parent company is JP Morgan, which is a big bank. Although it's hard, you know, there are multiple levels between our utility here and JP Morgan, but you know, they,
Are you purposely not mentioning the name?
it's Colorado Natural Gas. I don't have any, you know, problem. I'm more focusing on the concept than the utility, I guess.
They serve part of Pueblo West.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
so very small utility, just like a 10,000 or so customers, and they serve, you know, mostly in the mountains and whatnot, but, you know, great concern about the infrastructure in those communities and what it means to be owned by a bank and owned by equity investors. And then still try to provide, you know, a safe and reliable system in a very hard to serve territory. So that gives like big concern for us. But the business models are the challenge, and that's one of the things we're talking about. You know, this all goes to like, what's the public interest? The public interest is what the customers and civil society wants, right? And so if the utilities mandate is to provide and you know, service, and the PUC is, you know, to serve the public interest represents what you all want. And so it's the challenge is, how do you articulate that to the PUC so that they understand this is what serving the public interest means for us? And I think that's probably what you all have been beating around a lot every day. The challenge is, how do we deliver that to the PUC in a way that they understand, will help the utility understand what it means to serve us. And that's a challenge. We're not good at it in regulation.
And I have to add, and I don't want to derail you from the direction you're going, but it takes on even more importance with the policy changes now to electrify buildings and transportation, that we all sort of know one way or another, sooner or later, we're going to be using more and more electricity. So it makes the issue even more important when you know, going back to what I said a few minutes ago, the challenge of a high cost provider in a low income part of the state. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and you know, I think there are embedded costs. And, you know, we shouldn't be shy about saying this as policymakers. There are embedded costs in the energy transition. We're going to see some increased rates relative to changeover. You know, a big concern our office has is around gas infrastructure. So it's hard to do the math on decarbonization and figure out how we're still going to have a natural gas system. Like, to meet decarbonization goals, we know that we need a 60 to 80% volumetric reduction in the amount of natural gas we use in buildings. That's big. That changes a lot of what we do. And so the future concern for us is that will mean a lot of folks move to electric heating and heat pumps, and as the pool of customers gets smaller, that's more costs for the customers that are left behind. So,
And I'd like to say this is this is kind of a burr under my saddle. Is that what we have right now is for instance, we have a projection from Black Hills that looks at the next 10 years, 20 years perhaps, of demand. And that's flat. And we know that's not true. We know it's not going to be flat for just the reasons that Emily elucidated. And so that to me is a big problem, and that bothers me.
well, I mean, we're in the very early stages of figuring out what the trajectory looks like. But, you know, with some of these things, we need to act now to avoid costs, you know, far down the road. And that's the hard part, right? That's hard for a utility who has, you know, shareholders that needs to pay now. It's hard for a regulator that, you know, is trying to find some balanced solution. And, you know, this transition. So how do we move through a transition where we know there's going to be costs? We know we have all these things, you know, to balance, and we have to make, you know, tough decisions. Let's go to the next slide. You know, the rubber meets the road on ROE on a lot of on a lot of things, and that's often what we fight about in rate cases. You know, ROE is the return on equity, right? This is investors gave a utility money and they expect something out, and ROE has really kind of been the tension point for a lot of utilities. Most of our utilities sit in the low nines, 9 point something. 9.2, 9.3% return. What's odd in Colorado is we have seen ROEs on a downward trend. But we've seen utility profits and dividends on an upward trend. And so how do you do that math? You figure
Yeah.
ROEs are going down, profits are going up, and it has to do with that base rate piece. Because the pool in which they're earning is getting bigger, even though ROEs are getting smaller, which is leading to bigger returns. And so that's where, you know, we focus a lot of our efforts on, you know, the right investment in that piece of it. And you know, I think one thing, you know, with the health of the utility, and this is an interesting, Emily, I don't know if you heard this in the hearing, but one of the interesting contrasts that we heard in one of the hearings was we had, you know, our investor-owned utilities come and talk about the health of the utility and access to capital. And it's important that we have access to cheap capital because that ultimately gets delivered to customers in lower rates. And so that gives you to think, okay, we really need to maintain where we are because we have healthy utilities. We're moving toward our decarbonization goals, and our co-op friends get up and they also have the same access to capital issues. And they talk to us about right now, we're in an environment where capital is the easiest thing to get. That, you imagine a world where utilities are fighting over access to capital, but it's actually the reverse. That right now banks are fighting to give utilities money. And so, you know, if we look at, we should, I think, be looking at an environment that's reflective of that. And, you know, ROEs at 9 may not be appropriate. And that's a way that we look at, you know, that is a way that a regulator can look at how do we deliver savings to our customers, right? How, you know, how can Black Hills deliver savings to its customers? Lower your ROE, right? Change the balance between investors and customers. I mean, that, I'm sure they would have a different perspective on that. I wouldn't ask John to speak up on that, but that's, I mean, that's an answer,
Stock pools.
right? You know, different capital structures, you know, if equity is more expensive for customers, maybe the ratio of debt needs to be higher, you know, maybe the returns and those kind of things can be adjusted. Those are big ways to do it, but also take big chunks out of customer rates.
Well, and then in our situation, we look at what it would cost. And we're looking at stranded costs
Mhm.
and what Black Hills would say their stranded cost is gonna be. And that is on top of everything else that we would have to do to acquire the infrastructure. So,
Yeah, I mean, this is the number one issue with municipalization,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, it was for Boulder, it was for Pueblo, is captive customers are captive to their infrastructure.
Mhm.
And you know, I don't know that we have an opinion. We know how, I mean, we know how much it costs, and we know customers, you know, don't want to pay that. And so that, you know, adds to our perspective on it. And that's why I'm kind of out preaching about, you know, talk about the balance between the customer and the utility and the regulator, right? Because that's a lever you can pull under the current system. you know, often it seems fruitless, right? But, you know, there's a range of action between, I don't know what it was in Canyon City, but I think in Boulder it was, you know, $115 million a year for 20 years or something like some massive,
Yeah.
you know, is some massive number. And I don't know any community that says, okay, we're ready to pull the trigger on that. And so what do we do kind of in the meantime is where I focused my brain a little more. That's why I'm pushing for like have informed conversation with the regulators about, hey, this is how we think about the compact. This is how we think about the financial relationship. This is how we think about our goals for our community and what that means within service. You know, hey, we pay the bills, and so we get a say in this. You know, we get a say in what this looks like for us, you know, whether that's some communities just want more programs. You know, Denver has decarbonization goals, but really they're focused on like, how do we provide more programs for our customers? You know, hey, we want e-bikes and we want charging stations and we want this, and that's different because Denver says like, okay, we have influence here and we use our franchise agreement to do this.
So your public interest is different in urban areas
Yep.
than it is in
Yes.
rural areas. So you have to, they have to realize that you have different public interests in most part of the state,
Yeah, and
with the exception that urban areas have the power
Yeah.
to legislate
Mm-hmm.
what they consider to be public interest, which might not be public interest for the majority of the state. Maybe it is for the population wise, but geographically.
Yep.
So you run into, just like all Midwestern states, you run across the urban versus rural
Yeah.
issues.
sure, but
Especially in Colorado.
yeah, I would tend to fall on the side of, you know, you have voice and try to use it and say that I think that regulators and parties are receptive to those. I mean, it may not be as much as you want, or it may seem like a slow process, but I don't think you get in the room and it's like, okay, you know, Denver's here and Canyon City's here. Right, number one, just often you're not in the same room, but I think that, you know, like I said, I think that this regulatory body is looking for that kind of feedback, and the legislature has given that kind of feedback too. Like, you need to hear from customers more and that kind of thing. And so how, you know, engaging in, you know, that conversation in a formal dialogue, I think is good. And Emily and I talked about, you know, some, I guess, policy direction that Canyon City has around rate cases and things like that. You know, I think that's a good avenue, but you can meet with commissioners too. And I think that maybe folks don't take as much advantage of this, as long as you're not in a proceeding,
Right.
you know, you can meet with them.
Here's an example of the problem. I think the problem that they see on the PUC side, this is my perspective. I sat in on a public comment hearing last week online regarding rulemaking around disconnections. Gas and electric utility both, I think, and good discussion. I was the only member of the public in the whole state that was on this Zoom call. So finally, the ALJ says to me, do you have something you'd like to say? Well, like I had to at least identify myself. She was looking among all those participating and trying to figure out who I was, because I wasn't a utility or an attorney of a utility but that to me is an illustration that it's not that hard to participate as a member of the public or a community or whatever in some of these hearings that are occurring and having a voice. And so they continued that hearing. I think there's gonna be more coming up. I forget when, but it's like one person.
Well, I was just even thinking about when the PUC came to Pueblo and you and I
Yes.
went
Oh,
and
yeah.
there were like 3 people or so.
Yeah.
Got up, one of them rambled forever and, you know, and all three commissioners were there and listening, half of
In
the
person.
Black Hills employees were there, but yeah, they were the Lord, you know, and they should be, but it's one of those to where it was interesting that your Pueblo has just gone through this off-ramp process that didn't go through, and so it's like, now it's just a forgotten topic.
Right.
And I think that's a shame too, because they didn't take advantage again of the commissioners coming down and being able to really say what they
Right.
felt. So again, it's education.
Yeah, I think. I would agree right now, and again, ebbs and flows with Emily's perspective, like what. That judge, and so we're in this really, if I can give context, like we're in this really obscure rulemaking where the legislature gave guidance last year on some consumer protections and what it takes to reconnect a customer. So like putting with these AMI meters, right? Putting direction to the utility on, hey, you need to be quick about reconnecting people. And you have to do it when they say, and here are all the guidelines, and you can't turn people off. And this rulemaking has kind of devolved into a conversation about, is it appropriate to use AMI meters for remote disconnect? And our office has the perspective that the disconnection is the worst possible outcome you can have. And using remote disconnection, even though that's a capability of the meter, is a complete failure in the relationship between the utility and now. Like, we think disconnections are bad. We think remote disconnection should never happen. But you still want to have a conversation about it. And so we proposed, okay, if you're gonna do it, it's not the default.
Yeah.
And the utilities would like it to be the default. And so we have a rulemaking about that, and we're fighting back and forth, and, you know, Black Hills lawyers yelling at me, and I'm yelling at Black Hills lawyer, and, you know, public services lawyers quoting Winston Churchill, like,
It's
appropriate for the conversation.
But at the end of the day, the person that's going to be most affected by it is not there at the table.
Not there.
Why do they not know that they can be there?
And then
at
the
table?
one person, Emily,
Yeah.
speaks up and says, you know, hey, this is what I think.
Yeah.
And the judge is like glued to that. And so,
Yeah,
you know, customer feedback is really important
Right,
to
right.
these conversations. And it's difficult because the PUC isn't set up for outreach. That's not
Yeah.
something that a regulatory body is good at. And they're working at it.
They
They're
are.
trying to get better. And citizens also,
well, it's
You know-
intimidating for, you know, somebody here in town that's got 6 kids and struggling to put food on the table. They say, they don't think that they have any power and right to go
Right.
before the PUC
But
and
what
say,
we
hey, this is a
have-
problem.
but what we have
Yeah.
seen, right, is there was this public hearing. What kicked a lot of this off
Mhm,
is
mhm.
there was a
Yeah.
public hearing in public services electric rate case. And like, out of nowhere, 100 people showed
Yeah.
up. And they said, this cannot go on. My bill went from $100 to $300, $200 to $600. And now all of a sudden we have, you know, action and focus from the utility. And so,
Now I'm gonna put it back on us as the ratepayers,
Yeah.
those people that don't pay their bills, we subsidize through
Yeah,
our rates.
exactly.
And so, you know, this is where my 40, sometimes I have to come back over to the dark side, is to sit there
No, but you're right.
and realize, you know, hey, you know, if I can't buy eggs, I can't buy eggs.
Yeah,
If I used electricity and I didn't pay for it, what's that person supposed to do?
Yeah.
And the whole thing is, okay, so then you give them, okay, pay your current and 10% or whatever.
yeah,
But if they couldn't pay it to begin with,
right.
you know, so
Well,
I, it's, boy,
it's like charging groceries. You
oh.
can't repossess groceries. Believe me, I would have loved to be able to
Well, you know
repossess the
what, in my
groceries.
marketing, we said we needed to have at that time, public service
Yeah.
credit card.
Yeah,
And at that time, Del Hawk, the says, no, we are not going to do that. And it was like, you know what, the nice thing about from a utility perspective, you pay with a credit card, you get your money.
Yeah,
It's the credit card company that
Yeah.
takes the risk.
yeah.
So, but that was something that,
Charges
you know, he said,
30%.
no, we're not going to do that. So
Yeah.
they at least were trying to look out a
Mhm.
little bit, but it's
Yeah.
a toughie.
It
you
is.
know?
It really
Particularly
is.
because we don't expect people to live without electricity in our day and age. We
Right.
just don't expect. people to.
Yeah.
So I'm a landlord. Okay? This last month, the gas company came and shut the natural gas off of one of our houses.
And you didn't know it.
No, we didn't know it. Well, we knew it. We haven't seen the truck out there, and I have personally paid like a $200 gas bill. So they didn't get their gas cut off,
Mhm.
okay? Well, the next day. Atmos was back hooking up their natural gas.
$100.
Why can't they take the responsibility to pay it before they come and disconnect and have to pay a reconnect fee?
If they
The
have
tenant, you mean.
Uh-huh.
The
Well,
tenants, yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
If they have the money.
But at the same
Well,
time,
hey,
you,
come on.
you have to pay that natural gas fee so the heat stays on, so your pipes don't freeze.
Right.
Da-da, 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 yeah.
And you
You
should
know
have been
what?
on there
Yeah.
to whereas the notification.
Yes, exactly,
And I'm
yeah.
sure Black Hills has that ability as a landlord.
Let's roll it back in here.
Okay.
I mean, so one thing, one thing that I think this illustrates is, that like a lot of this is prioritization, right? Like I think we think, the cost relative to low income assistance within the utility, like that's a cost. But policymakers have said, that's part of our utility framework. I don't know, this group might not know this, but at the end of the year, utility bad debt is socialized amongst all ratepayers. So bad debt for utility is a pass-through in a different way than it is for a business owner. So a business owner can collect, writes off its bad debt at the end of the year, but that you don't recover bad debt one for one, right? It
Right.
lowers your tax burden and then you pay taxes on that. So you get a fraction of your bad debt, but bad debt is passed on relative to all ratepayers at the end of the year. That's kind of just general practice. And so there are lots of these little, we talked about ROE, we talked about bad debt, within utility planning, we use the coldest day or the hottest day of the year in the most extreme example to build our system. So that like leads to the chance that we could never possibly have an outage, the Texas thing, where, and so there are lots of kind of these little things that happen in utilities that add a lot of costs. And we look at those relative to some of these policy solutions like energy assistance or the DSM that get programs that get provided to a community and rebates. And it's like, so how do you weigh those and find a balance that translates to rates? I mean, dividends are another one. And what I'm trying to get to, I think I just have two more, I'm way over
We can move
time.
these whenever you need to.
Yeah.
We can-
Yeah, the risks of what we're talking about move us away from the visions and priorities of customers or communities, right? It becomes the vision and priority of the utility and the conversation they have with the regulator. And for us, that feels dangerous, right? That feels like that's where we get in this situation where costs are too high. We don't feel like our utility is responsive to what we want, that we don't have opportunities, to change the way our utility looks or serves us. And that's, I mean, this is a weird concept, right? We're thinking about like an economic exchange, but it's really like a policy thing. And so that's why I kind of keep pushing and saying like, there is voice and there's opportunity for communities to feed in, and that will translate to decision making. And it's hard work though. What, you know, this is the only, you know, kind of weird slide to think about, and I'll leave this about, you know, this will be my last one. There's another one, but this will be it, because I think this hopefully leads folks to think about community action. So Black Hills, this is my favorite one of them, but the Black Hills, like really good investor talking point is they're the dividend king. I don't think you guys call yourselves the dividend king. But what Black Hills has had an increasing dividend for 51 years in a row.
51 years.
Wow.
What percentage?
I think it ebbs and flows. Right now, they're at I think their biggest dividend ever was last year, and they were at 51 cents, which is a healthy dividend for utility. And there's a good and bad to that, right? And that's the healthy utility. You want a healthy utility, but how much is too much? Atmos is a really healthy utility. Their dividend is 74 cents. And, you know, that's where we start thinking about, you know, something is out of balance, right? When we start seeing big dividends or public service, their profit last year was something like $1.5 billion. Colorado's the largest profit center for Xcel Energy, which is the big, you know, global company. And so when you have, complaints from customers and communities, and in contrast, start seeing, you know, these record dividends, and we just talked about how easy capital is to get right now. That it would make sense that the first place we look to give is here, and not necessarily at our low income programs. You know, our fight over disconnections is over $200,000 savings for Black Hills. They say they'll save $200,000 a year with remote disconnects. So I look at like, there's probably 15 other things we can get to before we get to that. If it means not shutting off, you know, customers within the community that already can't pay their bill. Because we know, like most customers that get shut off are can'ts, not wants, right? They just don't want to pay their bill is this much of the actual customer thing. And so,
And then the ones who do pay their bills that can't afford to are the elderly and
Yeah.
that, so it's.
yeah, we also.
The mindset.
We also know that, you know, only like 10, 20, 30% of eligible customers participate. And so most customers that have trouble paying their bills are making sacrifices to pay their bill. And so, so that's, I think, you know, our big challenge. Now, you know, I'll end by saying this is about the UCA's perspective, right? And we're a party that lots of parties have different perspectives than us, and I'm not saying that I am right or wrong, but that this is how we view the world, and, you know, how we feel like there can be, you know, meaningful movement on a lot of it. So I'll wrap up there. I know I took way.
Oh, no, don't worry about it. And let me share something with you, Joe. When I was working, one of the jobs that I had as a young engineer was to computerize part of a process. Okay, and of course, being computer nerds and, you know, we approached the canny old mill superintendent and said, look, if we do this, this is, you know, look at all these efficiencies we're gonna save this many man hours to do that, you know, in relation to the disconnects. And the mill superintendent, you know, listened to us and finally said, okay, that's really great. I'm glad to hear about all these efficiencies. Who can I fire?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes when you hear about these efficiencies, it's important to keep that in mind. That all these savings may not really ever be realized because who was fired?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah. I live in a house where my partner, if there's a plug-in, it's got something in it. I don't care what room it's in or whatever.
Don't you get a thank you note at the end of the year from Black Hills?
I didn't ask for one and I should send them one for keeping my electricity on and being reliable. But that being said, I quit trying to advocate for turn the doggone light off,
At least you.
pull the plug out or whatever. I just pay the bill. Or we do. But if you want to cut down, and I think this likewise needs to be portrayed out there to the consumer, you want to cut down on your electric bill, cut down on your usage.
I'm gonna give you my biggest pet peeve, even when I was working, because and I understand from a utilities perspective, but when you have an outage. And it's not the customer's fault for an outage, but it's mostly Mother Nature. I think that one of the worst things you can do for a small business is to charge them that dang demand. To hook it back up, because they're trying to get back on, so they put everything in and their demand goes up. And what happens? They get stuck with that for another 12 months or whatever. And I think that's the most unfair situation for a customer to have to go through. And yes, from a utility perspective, yeah, all of a sudden, unit 2 is having to bounce back up a little bit higher to get these people, but I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, we have not been a fan of demand charges. We don't advocate for that. But you know, the other side is there are rates that reflect the cost of the system. And I think, you know, we have generally been in favor of, you know, time of use rates, for example. Because of, you know, the potential to save money there. But we also look at that's, you know, the challenging thing is we can't have a rate for everybody.
No.
And we can't have one rate for everyone either. And so looking at, you know, time of use rates might not be right for every customer. And so giving an opt-out as an option. And, you know, EV rates are another example where I don't have an EV, I drive a pickup truck. And it's gonna last it's 11 years old and it's gonna last 10 more years. And, at least. And I don't need an EV rate, but someone that has an EV is contributing, if they charge right, it's contributing positively to the system, right? They can use and charge when it's cheap, you know, more usage for more electric usage spreads the costs over more units. And so all of us benefit from that. And, you know, finding the right balance, you know, the challenge, I think, with programs and, you know, hey, I can just use less is the ability for us to save under these programs is outpaced by the increase in base infrastructure. So, you know, I used to run the state's weatherization program and we could, like in our best scenario, we're really looking at like 10% savings a year. And we outpace that every year. Like we get a 3% rate increase, and then we get commodity prices go up and we get a new rider. And so that's the challenge, is even when I try to be a really conscientious and responsible customer, my bill still outpaces, you know, what I bring to the table. And so that just is a real like bad outcome. I have 3 kids, 8 to 13, and the 13-year-old, she plugs everything. I can't keep up with that.
That's why she's keeping the truck to get him through school.
Basically. So,
But he's adjusted to what he knows.
yeah, well,
You know you have to do that.
yeah, and I'm like, the most educated consumer,
Yeah.
right? And so most consumers aren't.
Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
I hate to, well, we don't need to expand the conversation, but I just wondered if you have if you're hearing anything about community choice energy in this
Mhm.
legislative session. Sounds like it's just not introduced.
So we don't really weigh in on legislation a lot in our office. I mean, we're focused on the regulatory side, but there has been conversation on community choice it's called community choice energy here in California. It's called community choice aggregation. And it's basically communities can opt to essentially create its own purchasing utility. And then it uses or rents the infrastructure from the default utility. And you know, we're in California, it was invented really to push toward communities that had decarbonization goals that were out ahead of the state of California. You know, there are others now that are looking at it more of a cost basis of CORE, which is the biggest or second biggest cooperative in Colorado. It used to be called Intermountain.
REA.
Yeah, they had a wholesale contract with public service, and they've just opted out of their wholesale contract, and they're looking to procure market energy,
Mhm.
because we're seeing, you know, at the wholesale level, like a lot of opportunity for communities to find savings there that we're not seeing, and like they're not seeing with the kind of incumbent provider. And so I mean, I think it's a good conversation to have. I don't know where the legislature is on it. You know, I had heard there was gonna be a bill, but I hadn't seen if it
No,
was introduced or
I
not.
don't think it has been. Well, we really appreciate.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so, you know, we aren't allowed to represent, you know, individual customers or communities, but we, excuse me, are really open to being a resource and helping folks understand how to navigate.
We choked him up.
Yeah. They're having a hard time.
Oh, I talked for an hour and a half.
There's water in the
So-
kitchen.
So, no, I think I can.
Okay.
So we're happy to be a resource. I mean, we can't be an official representative, but if there are questions from the groups on proceedings or, you know, we work with lots of stakeholders, our lawyers can have
Yeah.
that conversation. We're happy to offer that in knowing that.
Keep going straight.
And knowing that this is really difficult and inaccessible.
So what keeps your organization financially going? Do you get money from the state? Do you charge for your services?
No, every customer. So I can't remember the fraction, like 4.45 hundredths of every bill.
It's
or
the
something
one line
comes.
item that's not on your bill.
Right.
So it's called the Fixed Utility Fund. And it was created
Don't jump on the water.
It was created to help fund our office. The Public Utilities Commission is also funded by that. I mean, this has come up, you know, Steve mentioned, you know, one of the hot topics in the, in these joint select committees has been, you know, we have advocated for many, many years that customers should not foot the whole legal bill for a utility to make its
I agree.
case.
Yeah.
You know, we have
Numbers are ugly there.
we have not been successful,
Yeah.
frankly, like, we don't win that argument. But that has been an argument that, you know, now has come up at the legislature. This is about, rate case expenses. They've been discussing lobbying. So, you know, our two biggest private lobbying entities at the Capitol over the last couple of years have been Public Service and Black Hills. You know,
We're doing what we can for the economy.
advertising and, you know, other expenses like that, you know, add up. And also the influence of that adds up. And so we think that, if you're going to influence activities, that these bodies, that customers shouldn't pay for that. In contrast, you know, we represent the customers at the PUC, and so maybe it makes more sense to have a little funding, but also like recognizing our, you know, we should have, you know, a fiscally restrained budget, you know, as public servants and as, you know, making sure that we maintain, you know, and use the public dollars appropriately and whatnot. So I would never advocate, although it would be nice to have a $10 million budget or whatnot. That just seems like probably out of the scope and scale of what we need. Although it would be.
Oh, you just start getting above your raising it. We don't want
Right.
that.
So
I'd be able to get a new truck in
I
8 years.
hate it, yeah.
I like my truck.
So Joe, the UCA is a subset of DORA,
Uh-huh.
okay? And DORA, we do get emails from DORA as, you know, as public officials perhaps, or depending on our interests, but what kind of I think that the things that you guys are working on are of enough interest. What kind of outreach is the UCA doing to provide, for instance, public officials information on what's
Yeah,
going on?
so we are, very soon should have a job posting out for what we call outreach specialist or something like that. And we're hoping to hire someone outside of Denver to work with, you know, local communities, stakeholders and whatnot. Because frankly, like, this is new to us too, like
I'll make a suggestion there. Contact Brad Brolin over at the Emergent Campus. Those guys are experts in, and that's actually a real recommendation. Well, no, they've got the Emergent Campus over there where it's all remote workers.
Yeah.
And they have actually a pool of people that are pretty skilled. And perhaps I can, let's see, is your contact information on here?
Should be on his card.
I have more.
I've got it on your
cards, too.
card. I've got your card.
And so that's one, that's, you know, in the future, we have on our website, we have a tab where we put every public hearing that's coming up. So, you know, easy resource for, you know, you click on there, it shows the proceeding number, it shows, you know, what the utility that filed the proceeding, what the topic is. And then as soon as we get, you know, link information from Zoom or whatever, it goes on there. So that's another resource. We do some social media to try to get it out. No one wants to follow the utility consumer advocate on Twitter. You know, we're pretty low on the coolness.
Just store utilities, just like.
Sure, well, it's the industry, I guess. So that's what we look at, but we also have, general email that folks can contact. One thing I'll toot our office's horn on is we responded to every call, email, correspondence that we received from this latest affordability event. So that's over, like I said, over 600 calls and emails. That's how I was contacted.
I filled out a form on their website and got an email back,
Yeah.
so that's how that works.
So we try to be as responsive as we can on that too.
Thank
Great.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the invitation.
I appreciate that, and the information they've shared with us, I think is something that we can incorporate and perhaps use going forward here. Especially in terms of staying a little bit closer to UCA and what you guys are doing, what the world looks like to you guys, because that is something I think the city needs to do a little better at. So. Any other questions?
Just appreciate you coming.
Yeah,
And make the
absolutely.
conversation
Yeah.
richer.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm happy to come down again anytime, or, there's more technical stuff. Bring an engineer or an economist or someone that talks a lot less. than me. And I don't think I'm sending, John's
No,
not
you're
gonna
just-
run back and say,
Is this your flash drive or the city?
I think that's the city.
Okay.
So I have a couple more cards
Yeah,
and
yeah.
maybe a few.
We don't usually let John keep it in questions.
I wrote this down earlier. You talked about, kind of also dealing with the FCC and some different things. And one of the things that I've seen just kind of on the ground anecdotally as an impact is as broadband continues to roll out, becomes very important, right? It's impacting our operations because of the number of utility locates about the make-ready work that's associated with them attaching to our poles and all those different things. So I'm just kind of curious, is there anything being considered to kind of help? Because what I see is a cost shift, right? It's coming away from these broadband providers and it's coming to the utility customers as a cost. Are you familiar with any conversation around that? It's something I've personally been concerned about, not even as a Black Hills employee, just
Yeah.
something I've.
I mean,
noticed.
this is an odd work of government is actually, we deal in telecom and the public utilities deals in telecom, but broadband is not
Oh,
telecom.
Yeah.
Broadband is broadband
Yeah.
for whatever reason. And so it doesn't come into our world a lot. But, it does, there's obvious synergies that the co-ops have, looked at broadband as part of their business model, right? A lot of them are starting to provide broadband services on top of electric service. Because of the.
The rural
costs.
area.
Yeah, and the right of ways and all of the things that make broadband.
All the
work.
power. Yeah.
Is broadband part of Dora, excuse me, John, but is broadband part of Dora's portfolio?
I don't know that exactly. I think broadband sits in a couple offices. I
Yeah.
think Dora has some broadband, DOLA
Sure.
has some broadband.
Oh, wait, at mine.
Oh, and it probably does too.
Who?
Office of Economic Development
Oh, yeah.
and International Trade.
You had something else, John?
No, I said, thank you for answering my question.
Great, okay.
Yeah. Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you all.
You're welcome. We do have a little bit more committee business, but the. Does anybody, I don't think we're gonna be able to go through all of our, recommendations. We do have those, the Does anybody have any comments or anything they'd like
We
to?
don't have Emily's, I don't.
Did I can't,
You
okay.
emailed them, but I
Did
don't
I?
think maybe they.
Oh, I
didn't
have
time.
copies.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
you said you were gonna.
Yeah, I did, didn't I?
Yeah.
They should have been, I sent those, they should have been.
Well, I think I sent mine so late.
Well, I was in the
Send
middle
around
of
the
putting
copies.
lasagna together, so, yeah, those are.
We didn't get
Oh,
them?
no, I didn't
No.
get that, no.
Oh, okay. All right.
Send copies that way and,
On yours that way.
but yeah, we might just need to have the discussion
Yeah.
next time.
I think so,
Do you
yeah.
I have it.
We need to point it out where you need to go.
I think I can find my way. I wanna look at
Yeah,
that.
if you're gonna be told where to go. Emily's in the first.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Yeah.
thanks.
Appreciate it.
Keep that one, please.
Yeah, so that might be on the agenda next time, John, these recommendations.
Yeah.
Okay,
So because once we do these recommendations, then that will probably be our last committee meeting. So keep that in mind. I've got some comments, but Emily is specifically
Where
about
did
yours,
these
but I'll
come
give them
from?
to you.
Whose recommendations are these? Is that yours, Emily?
Emily's.
No,
Yeah.
mine
No,
is my
that's
name.
mine.
Yeah.
Okay,
I didn't.
there's
see
some here on the
yours.
table.
Mine has my name at the
Oh,
bottom.
okay. Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't have the name on it.
And mine, two little ones are under John's in this.
There you go, Doug.
handout.
Yeah,
Oh, I
and
got
I
it.
didn't have my name on it.
Okay, and yours are down there, Doug?
Something like.
I think they were over there.
Well, I don't know.
Oh, and this,
Take a look at that, Doug. Is that yours?
She's got-
Which
Oh, all
one?
right.
The one that was just handed to you.
No, that's an Emily. No, mine,
There's.
no, my name is not on mine. I just sent it to John.
Yeah, I think so.
Says subject recommendation.
Yeah, that's Doug's. Okay, I got that one. I don't have
Yeah,
that.
go.
All right.
There's a stack of Emily ones here. Anybody else?
I need one, please.
Okay, and
Yes.
my two little ones are down below John's on the first page.
So,
Oh, gotcha, okay.
Because that was all I could do in between making lasagna and stuff, so.
Well, if you didn't bring the lasagna, the heck with your recommendation.
Oh, they ate it all.
so we will plan on having our next meeting.
And then now.
Regular time.
So I can free up my Mondays completely.
I
Could be.
will not be here.
It could be, you will not be here.
That's the 24th, if I
It is.
remember correctly. Yes, I'm leaving on vacation that day to California.
Okay, all right.
For me, oh dear. 304 miles to Green River.
So I will make sure. Okay, I put this down as an action item for me. I will send everybody, because people did reply to me, but individually in some cases. So make sure everybody has a copy of everybody's recommendations. And perhaps Kathy, what you can do is either get with somebody and let them know what your thoughts are. Or
Okay.
capture that in a document or whatever you think is appropriate. Because we would like to hear from you.
Perfect, okay.
Okay,
Well, did Boulder ever get settled on anything?
Oh,
they
yeah,
have an agreement with Excel.
Yeah.
That accomplished some of what they needed. to
Yeah.
do. That's,
Okay.
that's my design.
yeah, I think they basically came to a pretty good. It's one of those, that a lot of things they were asking for. Ended up being planned anyway, and I'm sure that what it did is it speeded up some of Excel's or public services intentions. But yeah, they've come, and I don't know if they actually have a franchise now, or it's basically an agreement.
Like an MOU?
Kind of, yeah, because they also, the Pueblo voters voted in, so they're still getting the city is getting the 3%. And I think that Excel still puts it on their bills, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, they ended up with a franchise.
Did they end up with their own? I couldn't remember.
Pretty
Okay,
sure they did.
okay, thank you.
okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and conclude this meeting and I'll get it shut down here. And we'll see you all, except you, Kathy, but Hopefully you'll be here in spirit.
Yeah,
Sure.
you guys might appreciate, I heard over the weekend that, one level 3 EV charger takes as much utility infrastructure as what would serve 100 homes.
Really?
Yep.
Never heard that.
Yeah, I don't think people understand how much level 3.
Oh,
yeah.
It's a big energy